You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, and one of us is chained. None of us are free, 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 and one of us is chained. None of us are free. There are people in darkness.
All right, good evening, hi, and welcome to the Labor Radio Podcast Network's weekly live stream. I'm Chris Garlock from Union City Radio. My co-host this week is Patrick Dixon from the Labor History Today podcast. Hey, Patrick.
Good to be here, Chris. I'm excited about our guest this evening. It's just a shame it's such a quiet week. What are we going to talk about, Chris?
Well, we'll figure that out. A little bit later, so we have a brand new organizing win, so that'll be fun for you. We also get reactions to the nomination of union leader Marty Walsh to be Secretary of Labor. Plus, why does Maryland need a new state song? And Johnny Cash plays Folsom Prison. But first, there is a little something that happened today. The second, count them, 2 impeachments of Donald J. Trump. He's number 1. Joining us to get a worker's eye view is American Prospect Editor-at-Large Harold Meyerson and John Russo, Associate Editor at the Working Class Perspectives blog. Welcome to you both.
Good to be here.
All right, Harold, I want to start off with, I love your leads. I always love your leads. I mean, I love everything you write, but your leads are just great. Here's your lead from last week's column, which I'm sure you've forgotten already because it's a week old now, but Donald Trump's presidency climax today with the definitive expression of what it's always been about: one man's psychopathic narcissism and his appeal to a pathetic lumpen proletariat.
Yeah, well, the lumpen proletariat also includes the lumpen rich. And as a former American Prospect writing fellow, Adam Serwer, noted in The Atlantic, I think yesterday, Trump referred to some of the people storming the Capitol as low class. The nuttiness and pernicious racism that was underlying the attack on the Capitol last week really was pretty cross-class. And that includes the definitely non-working class Republican members of Congress who have been abetting this just almost as much as Trump. I mean, today, as we speak, it's just been a couple hours since Trump was impeached for inciting the violence that took place at the Capitol last week. But while he was the insider in chief, hundreds of Republican elected officials have been saying the election was a fraud ever since early November, and they're abetted by their echo chamber in the right-wing media. So there's a lot of blame and guilt to go around, and it's both cross-class and not simply Donald Trump's doing.
John, let me bring you in. You also, recent column, also a good opening line. Some predictably, politicos and commentators spent much of 2020 debating why working class voters supported Trump and how the Democrats could win them back. Although we've occasionally contributed to these conversations, we're also getting tired of them. So why are you getting tired of these conversations?
I think they've become too simplistic, and I must say, based on sociology and different variables and discussions that really ignore a whole set of cultural issues. I mean, what winds up happening is that the working class gets lumped up as one block, and when it's much broader, much more difficult to really think about what is the working class. It's interracial. It's not just the white working class. But they often get that lump. As a result of that, they often get blamed for anything that's happening. And that's why I'm so glad that what Harold said was that those people who were involved in the riot or coup, or however you want to talk about it, it was multi-class. And I was asked by a reporter to comment, well, isn't it great that all these executives and the national associations of manufacturers and all these other groups, are wrapping themselves in democracy and basically saying that this was terribly wrong and something's gone wrong. And that even Mike Pence has considered, removing Donald Trump from office. As well, there's an array of academics and pundits and professional elites. I've been saying that, well, it might be that they're not just condemning the violence and the destruction of democratic values. A lot of what they're saying is pretty disingenuous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Given their role in economic restructuring, advocating austerity programs, use of globalization as a means to lower labor costs, and undermine union bargaining power. And when they're trapped by their actions, and when it becomes contested, they argue that perhaps their embrace of neoliberal economics and globalization went too far. And now we hear the refrain, we have to turn back to a form of stakeholder capitalism. I have in the back of my mind, I think that they are worried about something else.
Uh-huh.
That the next time this occurs, they're going to be coming after them.
I think
And so and you listen to the tech oligarchs who are really worried about the impact of artificial intelligence and technology and how that's going to exacerbate the already terrible unemployment situation.
Yeah, I think there's a sense in which the folks that John is talking about contributed to this sense of rage and betrayal. Now, they themselves have not become the target of those who expressed rage and betrayal last week and in general on the right wing of American politics. But there's certainly they are among the major forces that lit the fuse. One quick note also about the corporations that have suddenly said, oh well, we ain't given to the
come to Jesus moment.
Election now. I noticed one of them was Dow Chemical, and for
really?
a moment, yes, for a moment I wondered if they would actually drop napalm on like Kevin McCarthy. It turns out they're not, but I don't know. For some reason, that thought just.
I see where you're going with that. I see where.
Yeah. Okay.
I think what's important to add to what Harold is saying, if you listen to the rhetoric and the narratives, and I'm not saying that the violence and all the other stuff that was going on, if you listen to the narratives, they're frequently fighting against elites and corporate interests and Wall Street. Just we have a dog.
Hey, pets are always good. We're pro pet on this show.
Yes.
Our viewership just doubled thanks to the dog. So it's
really.
It's funny because Sherry's doing a Zoom call in the other bedroom.
The dog is like, why?
So obviously your dog wants to do a Zoom call too.
Yes, she wants to be in it too. So but I think it's really interesting. And I said as part of this other interview I did is that if you look at that language. And look at the language of the Black Lives Matter and some of the Latino X movements. They're very similar.
Yes,
so the colors may be different, but their grievances are the same.
I think that's such an important point. I want to get into that, but I also want to bring Patrick in as well. Go ahead, Patrick.
In recent days, Joe Biden seems to have a series of stock sayings, and the one he seems to refer to most often is either "this is America" or "this isn't America." It's often a rather simplistic analysis. Do you think Biden has the sort of sophistication or the sort of analysis to navigate what's really quite a complex situation here?
Harold, you want to take that?
I don't think any president has ever taken office at a time of pandemic, economic catastrophe for a chunk of the nation, and sort of ongoing insurrection. I mean, that's a hell of a challenge. If you look at Lincoln's first inaugural address, not his second, but his first at a time when 7 southern states had already seceded and were threatening to take over federal military installations. Lincoln gave a very, very, very long address about the legalities of all this, and then had a peroration appealing to the better angels of our nature so that we wouldn't tear ourselves apart. Biden will be giving an inaugural address 1 week from today. And if I've written some speeches in my time, that wouldn't be necessarily the easiest speech I or anyone else had to write. I mean, I think he's right in affirming that there is such a thing as the United States of America that he's becoming president of. But it's obvious that, we have divided into camps. And I think the most important thing he can do once he takes office is put through the kind of economic measures that benefit the American people, which inevitably will mean benefiting the red and the blue, and seeing where he can go from there. I mean, in other words, the only unifying program I think he can put forth really would be a sort of progressive economic.
John?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, in the piece that we wrote for the blog and also for social policy, is that the first thing he has to address, obviously, is the coronavirus.
Right.
And then he's got to deal, ensure that people, have enough income. They're not thrown out of their homes, which is really a real threat now. Dale Miharich's piece in The Nation recently really was good on that. And then they could turn itself to a broader sort of industrial policy and sort of rebuilding America, not unlike the parts of the New Deal, where there's improvements in economic opportunities, improving the labor laws once again, improving some training policies. I'm not sure that he can do all that in 9 months, 18 months, 2 years, given the budget. And if he doesn't deliver, the drums are going to start beating again. And I think that I'm arguing and I have argued again in some other places, that this election was really very, very important. But the most important election is 2024. Because we're going to find out whether the two populist camps that are growing, and I include the left populist camp and the right populist camp, and I sort of take a perspective that's not unlike Steve Bannon, where it's not a linear right and left, it's a parabola.
Right.
And where the right and the left populism at the bottoms of that are growing, while the middle of it is, shrinking and dropping down into the right and left wing populism. And I think as unemployment continues and technology and artificial employment or artificial intelligence gains a greater foothold, you're going to find more and more people dropping into those camps. And that 2024 is really going to be the fight between the left and the right in ways that we haven't seen in any time.
So we only have a couple of minutes left, but I want to spin this out, maybe get one more reaction from you both, because that's exactly where I wanted to go. I mean, I had a bunch of labor leaders on, my show last week, and I had to say that, when you see people occupying, we've done occupations. When you see doing rallies, we do rally. Now, we don't break in windows and assault cops because, we would get shot or the shit beat out of us. But I think that both of you are talking about this, the left-wing populism, the right-wing populism, a lot of the things that Trump talked about were actually labor issues. Harold, what's your take on this? Where we're going?
Well, the defining difference, though, is that the right-wing populism defines its grievances by defending white racism, right, white supremacy, and right, all of that. So, in terms of this nation being able to go forward at all, you have to put forth, I think, Rooseveltian solutions. Remember, the 1920s, the period before Roosevelt, had some similarities to this. You had the height of the KKK was in the 1920s. The Democratic Party was really divided, since it was partly the immigrant North and the white Dixiecrat South. It was divided fundamentally and was going nowhere. Roosevelt put together a coalition based on progressive economics that was, reasonably liberal on social issues, although they had to accommodate the white Southerners, and that was a huge problem. If the Democrats are going to prevail in 2024, as John says is going to be, a real challenge, and it is, they're going to have to find kind of the modern day equivalent of that kind of program, of that kind of solution. And we've always had a far right in this country that was, a real problem. It may be more of one now because of right-wing media, right-wing social media. But the Democrats have to offer something very tangible, not rhetoric, but very tangible, a kind of economic security which, tens of millions, if not more, Americans are not experiencing, to revalidate their claim to leadership.
Well, let me pitch this to you, John, and then maybe how you want to take a crack at it. One of the things that I've been really blown away by, and you guys have been around, right? I mean, anytime we want to do anything, they always say, we don't have the money. We don't have the money. Well, it turns out they did have the frickin' money, when they had to. And so maybe to you, John, I mean, is there any chance we're actually going to get the kind of big ticket, actual stuff that we need, or are they going to keep sort of nibbling around the edges?
Well, I think you have to ask yourself who really controls the Democratic Party. And I think it has a sufficient interest from Wall Street. And so whether that's going to work or not, any of those programs are going to work, I think is problematic at best. Look, if they had a program that's, I think Harold and I think maybe talked about in the past, that Sherrod Brown put together. It was 3 months after the 2016 election. It was all 78 pages, and it was very specific. And it got absolutely no traction within the Democratic Party. Okay, it was great. Labor leaders loved it. Other people, progressives loved it, but it didn't get any traction from the people who were in charge of the party. And so, and you've got Biden, who's is not all that charismatic, to be sure, and to be
generous with faint praise, John.
Yeah, and you got to have somebody who's going to really challenge what's going on. I think Sherrod and Sanders and some of the other more progressive wing of the party are going to be positioned in their committees to do some of that.
Right.
But Biden doesn't seem like the type of charismatic leader that can really push that. But they may get pushed into it. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right.
We can't underestimate what is about to happen on top of the coronavirus, on top of the already high levels of unemployment, increasing inequalities. You're about to get a type of technological revolution that's going to be cross industries. And people are worried about it. I mean, if you look at the tech people, they've been having conferences over the last 3 years. A lot of them were in Germany, the Synergy Summits, that tried to figure out, what are we going to do when all these people are going to be out of work because of our technology, and they're already mad at us.
Right.
You can look at Facebook, Twitter, and all the rest of the ones that are under a lot of right now. So they're trying to desperately find a way through this without giving up a great deal of their wealth, I might add.
Let me go back to you, Harold, because Evan, our producer, is just flagging this 100-day agenda that you guys put out. Do you want to maybe talk briefly about that before we wrap?
Yeah, and we've also put out since the fall of 2019, we've been putting out a day one agenda, which was premised on the notion that there are a lot of things the Democratic president, whoever that might be in 2019, we had no idea, could probably not get through Congress, but could do through executive power. But it's a lot, both that and the 100-day agenda are the things that Democrats need to do right up top, beginning with the pandemic, beginning with spending to alleviate the economic collapse of a good chunk of our economy. And I would add that, there's more and more stuff that the Democrats, just based on some news reports today, are trying to push into the budget reconciliation bill, which only takes 51 votes to pass. It's the one thing that does not require meeting the 60-vote filibuster cloture hurdle. They can jam a lot of stuff into that, and they had better. I mean, as far as, Biden has not exactly been either Mr. Charisma or a progressive stalwart in his long career. But, the one grounds I have for hope here is that necessity is the mother of invention. And the necessity for the Democrats to act fast and act big has probably never been greater.
Agreed.
All right. Well, we've scratched the surface, but I have a feeling we're going to be having more of these conversations over the next couple of months. I appreciate you both taking some time for what I know are very busy days, and I appreciate all of the. It makes me feel better being able to talk to you guys. I feel a little bit better than I felt earlier today. So thank you both for that.
All therapy will charge you by the hour.
That's right. Our bromides are cheap.
That too, yes. Bromos
Thanks.
and bromides, yes.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Hang in there.
You too.
All right. That is, of course, American Prospect Editor at Large, Harold Meyerson, and John Russo, Associate Editor at the Working Class Perspectives blog. You should check out both of those. Lots of good reading there. All right. Next up, a very exciting organizing victory. We don't have enough organizing victories, so they're all kind of exciting, but this one is particularly exciting. And to tell us about it, we're going to a longtime friend of mine, Kayla Blado. She's here in Washington, D.C., works with the Economic Policy Institute. For the purposes of this segment, she's president of the NPEU, the Nonprofit Employees Union, one of the fastest growing unions, and has just had an amazing string of organizing victories over the last year, when organizing, which has never been easy, Kayla, has been even more difficult. So tell us what's going on.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So today, NPEU announced our largest organizing victory ever, which is excellent. We went public with the ACLU Staff United. So the staff union of the American Civil Liberties Union national office has been organizing with us for the last almost a year, probably since the beginning of the pandemic. And they've been organizing for about 2 years internally. And so it's been a lot of work, but today we went public with the campaign and asked management for recognition of their union.
That's exciting news. A couple of things. So how big is the unit?
It's about 300 people.
Wow. So that's and I'm assuming, is this at the headquarters? Is this across the country? How does that work?
It's all across the country. They have folks in New York and DC, and then states all across the country.
Now, ACLU, of course, American Civil Liberties Union, great organization, fights for rights and so wonderful folks. However, is it a slam dunk that they're going to recognize the union? I'm trying to be sort of politic about this, and you can go ahead and tell us about the issues that you've had, I think, in Kansas City, right?
Yeah, so we're hoping that the ACLU does the right thing and recognizes their union. We all know that workers' rights are civil rights, and the ACLU should know that as well. So obviously, as our country is in turmoil right now, the ACLU has really important work to be doing. We're not trying to interrupt any of that by forming a union, but it also is extremely important that their workers have the protections of a union, particularly going back to the office after the COVID pandemic, bargaining for working conditions. And then particularly, one of their issues has been retention of workers of color, particularly Black women. So they really want to focus on that. And sorry, to answer your question though, it is, so we're hoping that they recognize, we know that one of their state affiliates, the ACLU of Kansas, who organized with the communications, they were with CWA, I think they, they were a small unit, and management had hired Ogletree Deacons there, this union busting law firm, to try to bust their tiny unit there. Through organizing nationally, their unit did a great job of getting the story out. They were able to actually have management drop Ogletree Deacons, recognize the union, and so they're recognized and they're bargaining their first contract.
All right, that's good news. All right, let me bring in my co-host, Patrick Dixon. I think he has a question or comment.
Good evening. I mean, I too was reading about this organizing success in the Post earlier. They quoted the ACLU. The ACLU says, the ACLU has championed the right of workers to organize unions since its inception more than 90 years ago. The ACLU continues to support the rights of employees, both public and private, to organize unions and bargain collectively. That seems fairly straightforward, but I guess it doesn't always turn out that way, does it?
Well, I mean, one of my questions though, and that was a nice setup, Patrick, but I mean, if they've, I mean, you know, when you have folks like this who recognize and fought for the rights of unions, why has their staff not been organized before?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they do have a small group of about 40 paralegals and administrative and operations folks who have organized with a UAW local, I think UAW 2110. And so that they organized a few years ago, and then this unit would basically be the wall-to-wall unit, except for those folks. I mean, it's a large organization. It's all over the country. It's a pretty siloed organization. I mean, a lot of nonprofits are, but I think theirs is particularly because they have a large legal department, and then they have an advocacy department, and then people who do development and communications and operations and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's one of the things, that's one of the reasons that they're organizing, is that they want to be a less siloed organization and have this kind of cross-departmental communication. And that's actually one of the things that the organizers noted recently, is they said that through organizing, they got to get to know their colleagues so much better. They had people that, you know, they're in charge of contacting their, to sign cards, and they had people that they're now friends with that they had never met before. So I think that's kind of cool.
Well, that's a nice story, because too often the narrative that we hear around organizing efforts is frankly all the horrible stuff that happens. You know, that you got to meet. You have to hide. People are afraid of getting fired. People do get fired. People do get disciplined. And so it's actually, I think there's always been that flip side, because having to talk to your fellow workers about real issues, right? I mean, it really does kind of, separate folks out in terms of which way you're going to go, right?
Yeah, and not to say this about ACLU, but other organizations that union bust, they try to play the union as a third party,
right?
And we're not. I mean, I'm a nonprofit worker. We're all nonprofit workers. And like I've said before, the reason we're organizing our nonprofit is because we care about the mission and we want to make it a sustainable place. And so, the management tries to paint us as divisive and coming in and breaking up their family. But, there might not be a union drive if they had that kind of collaborative culture to begin with.
Absolutely. And then the other really fascinating thing that I've always noticed about, these press releases I keep getting from you guys as you organize all these shops, is that more often than not, it includes this, wonderful statements, especially when the management has gone ahead and just recognize, right off the bat, and it's just not something you tend to see in announcements about organizing. It's usually, and now we're going to go fight, and so I just love that and in fact, I don't usually like to quote bosses, but when I get these lovely quotes from employers talking really good stuff about the union, it's really, it's cool.
Yeah. And I think, we're willing to fight when we need to fight, and we definitely do. But I don't think that, I think a lot of times we're closer to agreeing than we think. And basically having a union, if the employer agrees that their workers deserve a union, I feel like that's halfway there. That's half the battle. And basically, agreeing on the composition of the bargaining unit. And then obviously bargaining tends to be stressful, but I feel like if you're all working at the organization because you care about the same things, then hopefully that's kind of a good start, that you'll want to maintain the integrity of the organization and work to strengthen it together.
Wow, Kayla Blado, congratulations yet again. I've been saying this to you a lot, and I'm happy to do it. And we will keep tabs on this. We want to see what happens with it. So keep us posted, as I'm sure that you will. But congratulations to you and to all the folks, the workers at the ACLU. So keep up the great work. Thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much. Take care.
All right, take care. That's Kayla Blado. She's president of the Nonprofits Employees Union. All right. So I always say I'm in DC, but that's because it's easier to say DC than to say I live in Silver Spring, because where's that? Well, it's in Maryland is where I actually live. And for more than 80 years, Maryland has had a state song that was written by a pro-Confederate propagandist, refers to Abraham Lincoln as a tyrant and a despot, and denounces the Union forces. That would be the Union Army forces, not union as in, the organized unions that I work for, which included thousands of local patriotic Marylanders. It refers to them as Northern scum. I'm not making any of this up, by the way. This is all true. We are not going to play that song. The Maryland General Assembly, in its wisdom, has refused for decades to repeal this racist song. And one of the things they say is, well, we don't have anything to replace it with. Well, Steve Jones, who some of you will know, used to organize with the farm workers. He's with the DC Labor Chorus, and he got together with Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's in the news these days. He is the lead. What do they call it? He's the lead guy on the impeachment trial team, right? I don't know what that official name is.
I think it's the honcho. He's
the lead honcho.
Main dude.
I think Jamie actually wrote the article of impeachment, if I recall correctly. Anyway, Jamie, great guy, been in the news a lot lately. But Jamie, who's also a native Marylander, teamed up, a congressman obviously, teamed up with Steve Jones. They've written a song so that the people who want to keep the racist song can't say that there isn't another song. And so we thought that we would play that for you. So producer Evan, if you've got that cued, why don't you roll that?
Maryland, my Maryland, I'm coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland. Frederick Douglass threw off slavery's chain. The free state began to find its name. Harriet Tubman built a secret lane, said, come on board this freedom train. Maryland, my Maryland, I'm coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland. Rachel Carson told of the Silent Spring, of a time when birds no longer sing. Restore the Chesapeake for me and you, and all the Orioles will come home too. Maryland, my Maryland, I'm coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland. The artist's dream, the writer's words will flow. We come back to the grave of Edgar Allan Poe, a gardenia in the hair of Billie Holiday tells the promise of Maryland today. Maryland, my Maryland, I'm coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland. Whether Canesville, Easton, or Monocacy, we find the courage to make democracy. Send Frederick Douglass's message to all the land. If you want progress, come and make your demand. Maryland, my Maryland, I'm coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland. Oh, say, can you see Elijah Cummings now? Never took his hand from the freedom plow. And Justice Thurgood Marshall brought down Jim Crow. So let the waters of righteousness flow. Maryland, our Maryland, we're coming back again. From the western mountains to the ocean city shore, Rockville to Baltimore, Maryland, my Maryland.
Woo! That sounds like a song you could sing. I tell you what, that's Maryland, my Maryland, the Free State song. It's by musician Steve Jones. That was Steve on the piano there, and Congressman Jamie Raskin, who my fellow podcast host, Jeremy Waugh, tells me is the impeachment manager. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. By the way, the singer there was London Mava. I hope I didn't mispronounce her last name. She's a high school student from Prince George's. Wow. That is amazing. All right. To introduce our next guest, I'm going to turn things over to Patrick.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for sharing that song. I'm excited that we're joined this evening by Nick Juravich. Nick is an assistant professor of history and labor studies at UMassBoston and also the associate director of the Labor Resource Center. Welcome to the show, Nick. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I do a labor song of the week in my labor history class, so I'll have to put that one on the docket.
Interesting. One of the reasons we wanted to invite you on this evening then was after much deliberation and the floating of various different names, Joe Biden selected his old friend Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, to head up the labor department. Can you, for many people outside of Massachusetts, he's not a popular figure. Can you tell us a bit about him, and does he have your endorsement?
Well, it's not up to me who's Secretary of Labor, but I will say, I think in Boston, in Massachusetts, there's first of all relief because the Department of Labor will not be actively hostile to working people and their unions. And that's a very low bar, but I think that is where we're at whenever we have this transition, these past two administrations. And yeah, Marty Walsh, so he's the son of Irish immigrants. He grew up in Dorchester. I'm sitting here in Dorchester, about 2 miles from where he grew up. And his father was a member of Laborers Local 223. He joined that union, rose to be, I believe it's secretary treasurer, and then was head of the Mass Building Trades Council while he was also, the Boston Building Trades Council, while he was also a state rep. And then in 2013 was elected mayor of Boston. So he's held that post now for 2 terms. And he, he's someone who's very much of the building trades, of the labor movement. Certainly there's a lot of enthusiasm for him in that world. People feel he's really done right by his union and people he represents. Frank Callahan, who's currently the head of that Building Trades Council, was on WBUR last week. I was listening, talking about how here's a guy who has, stood in an unemployment line. He's worked on a construction site. He's also acutely aware of the sort of health and safety issues that not just construction workers face, but all workers face. And, having particularly this sort of the issue of unemployment and the issue of health and safety at the front of our Secretary of Labor's mind in this moment seems really valuable, I think. So there's some enthusiasm about him being knowledgeable about these issues in particular from his time as a building trades unionist.
Some of the folks in some of the other kinds of unions, they'll sort of, there's some skepticism, I think, and it's because the building trades, they allege, aren't necessarily representative of the diversity of union members today, not in all locals perhaps. And yet Walsh's defenders say that he's very aware of these things and that Walsh is the guy to change the building trades. And Walsh is really in front on issues of diversity, of bringing women into the construction trades. What do you think?
Well, I think so. I think both things can be true. So we are in a moment where the most dynamic sectors of the labor movement are led by women, are led by Black unionists, Latinx unionists, immigrant unionists. That's true here in Boston. I think of the BTU's Jess Tang, who's a brilliant organizer for that union as they've moved into the world of social justice education work. We think of the leadership of Unite Here Local 26, the UFCW, 1445. So we've got progressive unionists in Boston doing this work, and I think they're part of that wider world of organizing we've seen over the last decade. And certainly the building trades have not necessarily been at the vanguard of that, nor have they historically been. I'm a historian, and it's hard not to compare Marty Walsh to the last building trades organizer to be a labor secretary. I see Chris and Patrick smiling. Right, Peter Brennan of New York, who was as reactionary and vile as they come, instigated the hard hat riots. So reactionary, George Meany hated him. And of course, Meany actually hated him not for being a reactionary, but because he didn't deliver on the promise to raise the minimum wage that he'd come in with. So I think of that also in terms of Marty coming in with the promise of the PRO Act kind of hovering here, and to what degree he'll be able to be a sort of a voice for that and use the position as a bully pulpit. But Patrick, just to go back to what you were saying, when we look at Marty Walsh, and not just him, but the Building Trades Council he led, it's true. I mean, in 50 years, the trades have evolved. I wouldn't say it's not been a revolution, but you look at the leadership of these unions, the diversity of these unions, it's night and day from what it was 50 years ago. And there are, I think, some really promising directions, especially here in Boston, among the locals and as well as the council in terms of embracing some of these more progressive elements of organizing. But, nationally, that's not necessarily the case still. And I think, it'll be an interesting challenge for Marty Walsh, not just to represent sort of the unions he knows, but to be a part of the movement as a whole as it's grown over the last decade. And we hope he will.
I'm going to go to Chris in just a moment, but one of the most sort of in flux areas in work life in America, I suppose, has been the rise of many of these online platform jobs. And that's really sort of shifted the way in which many people interact with their employers, with clients, and so on. In his capacity as mayor of Boston, has Marty Walsh had to take positions on these types of issues?
I can't cite something specific in that regard. I mean, he has, as someone who's, been very involved in in the labor movement for a long time, he's generally sort of been supportive. He's out on picket lines. He's really supportive of various efforts here. there's a larger question of the economic transformation of Massachusetts, which itself is a state that, like a lot of places, very unequal now. Boston, no exception. They're an extremely expensive city. And certainly people on the left have wanted Marty to do a lot more to address, crises around affordable housing, around just the sort of general unlivability of a very expensive city like Boston. So I think there's, he's sort of balanced, as big city mayors do, the sort of many constituencies in a way that I think some folks might have rightly been critical of, but I don't know that he's weighed in too extensively on the tech platform question. Maybe he has and I'm missing it, but it's a good question to ask, certainly, as we think about what's happening after Prop 22, the measures in the PRO Act, and just the degree that the Department of Labor can lean on classification issues as one of the things it does with oversight. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I want we're here in DC, and I've worked with the Local 12, FG Local 12, that represents the workers at the Department of Labor, and I know a lot of the folks who work down there, frankly, who are great professionals, and every time a Republican, especially such oftentimes you've had people who headed the department who seemed like they were really just trying to dismantle it. Either from a frontal assault or, sort of bore it out from within. I wonder if you can speak to, what kind of culture change it means for a department to have, a labor department to have somebody at the head of it who walks picket lines. I mean, tell me the last labor secretary who walked a picket line.
No, I think that's right. And even, to sort of add on to that, the high profile nature of this sort of search, I think, speaks to the degree to which, the union movement has been on the march and the degree to which people are paying attention to this question. I don't think there was nearly the enthusiasm or the sort of the tension around searches during the Obama and Clinton administrations around labor secretaries. And I think, I hope that brings a sort of a culture change, and also, thinking about what it means for then the sort of the work they do as administrators. Hopefully this empowers them to be aggressive in going after violations of health and safety, of classification, wage theft, which of course is another huge issue in the trades as well as all over the country. So, I can't, these folks better than I do. I can't speak to what it'll mean for them day to day, but I hope it does mean they sort of feel empowered to put this kind of pressure out from the department on employers to really make them live up to the law. And hopefully we can make the law better too, but that's the next step.
Well, but to your point, frankly, often the problem is that, we've got good laws on the books, but you wind up with, and you have good people that work in the department whose job it is to enforce the laws. But they're under leadership that is, either pulling them back or actively interfering. And people don't want to risk their jobs, obviously, so that becomes a real problem.
Yeah.
I know. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Nick, I know you've also worked extensively on public education as an area of your research. What should we expect from a new administration here now that Secretary DeVos has taken offense and resigned from the administration?
It's I enjoyed the response from teacher unionists to her resignation. But there's a lot of undoing, right? There's an enormous amount of undoing to be done here. And I do think, that for me, as someone who's been studying and sort of working in education, I've got my Red for Ed flag behind me. Proud member of the MTA here as a faculty member at UMassBoston. The sea change in the way teacher unions, educators unions move, operate in the last decade is amazing. And of course, that's changed the way the entire world of ed reform, as it was once called, and sort of ed policy gets made. And I think, DeVos represented in some ways the sort of the apotheosis of this kind of shift in right thinking to basically stripping, I think it goes back to Milton Friedman and before, but stripping the existence of public education down to its parts and selling them off. And instead we have, the possibility of sort of rebuilding sort of an idea of the public good. And I think, where these things align for me, Patrick, is thinking about how do you articulate as a cabinet secretary, not just sort of the need to be a competent administrator and do the work of governing, but also sort of a vision of the public good, right? That public education is about sort of democratic promise and not just ensuring that kids do well on a test, right? And that likewise that, the Department of Labor and sort of the right to organize is about democratic society and life, industrial democracy. It's not just about you sort of making sure that people obey, you know, a sort of myriad of laws. So I hope, you know, in all these kind of ways, the Biden administration can articulate not just a sort of, you know, a sort of competency, but actually a vision for public good. That, you know, again, we heard earlier, I enjoyed listening to the first half of the show that sort of brings in, you know, these ideas about the New Deal and about sort of, you know, right, you know, reaching people in a sort of a more visible way for government to do that. Yeah.
Let me. We only have a couple more minutes, but I want to dip a toe into the sexy topic of labor law reform as eyeballs roll up across the country. And the reason I bring it up actually is a serious and a substantive one, which is, you know, everybody was celebrating, hey, we won the presidency, we got the Senate, which is great. I mean, you know, I've got my bunting up as well, and people are like, you know, everything is good now, right? Democrats are in control. And I keep having to remind people 2009, right? 2009, right? We had the presidency, we had the House, we had the Senate, we had a really poorly named and fairly weak labor law reform bill called EFCA, the Employee Free Choice Act, which never even got you know, anywhere in the Senate, right? And so, you know, I'm not trying to be a wet blanket, but you know, my concern is that, and a reason that there's a bunch of things in it, but the main thing about, you know, the pro-choice is that, you know, most people in America want to be in unions, right? If they weren't fired and you know, terrified, most people in America would join unions. You know, we had Kayla Blado out. You know, when you have people in nonprofits that are joining unions, it's a bit of a signal. It's a bit of a canary in the coal mine. So here's my question: is I told you where I am on the PRO Act. In terms, I'm pro for it, but I have my doubts about whether it's going to go anywhere. What's your read?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said, I think is exactly right. I've heard the same. You know, Jane McAlevey had a piece to the same effect in The Nation maybe a week or two ago, or a blog post rather. And I think, you know, just as with the sort of the cabinet appointments, you know, it would be a mistake to see, you know, the sort of the evidence of the power of labor at this moment, right? Making this a high profile appointment, likewise making the PRO Act something people are talking about, to treat that then as a kind of, you know, sort of a source of power, right? And there was actually, in the network, there's a great podcast, Maximilian Alvarez's Working Pod they did with, who is it, Jim Williams from Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and, you know, talking about how this has to be, you know, a movement. It can't simply be hoping the politicians will carry it across the finish line. And, you know, what that looks like, and I'm, you know, my organizing experience comes out of being a grad unionist, right? So being in educator unions and thinking about sort of, right, like you said, all of these new organizing efforts and how to kind of take the energy from many of these organizing efforts and sort of speak broadly about, okay, what does it mean to push for labor law reform in a kind of systematic way? I will say one other bit of history, I had to look this up. So there's one other building trades guy who was labor secretary. Briefly. Okay. This would be Martin P. Durkin of Chicago, who was a plumber and pipe fitter. And he was Ike's first labor secretary, Eisenhower's, in a cabinet that was dubbed 9 Millionaires and the Plumber. And,
yes, that's right. That's right.
And he stepped down after 8 months because Ike did not repeal Taft-Hartley's right to work and loyalty oath provisions. He'd been told he would. He pushed for it. When the Commerce Secretary undermined him after Senator Taft died, he stepped down. So that too, you know, insofar as Marty has a bully pulpit, you know, Joe's his friend. He's sort of a younger avatar of Joe. That's great. But I would love to see him put that kind of pressure on the administration. Prioritize this, get it through Congress, or else I can't keep working with you. You've got to deliver. I don't know if he'll do that, but I like that there's a model some 70 odd years back now that we can look to of someone saying, you got to do this or I'm walking. So
and actually walked.
Yeah.
Right. So we always love labor history in our shows, don't we, Patrick?
That's terrific. Yeah, we had Harold Meyerson on in a piece recently when he wrote about Marty. He did invoke the fact that when times when Biden refers to unions and his memories of unions, I think Biden often listed off the bricklayers, the carpenters, and the Boilermakers. And Harold said, "Well, do many people even know what a Boilermaker is anymore?" But
right, and it speaks to something I think that was, you know, John Russo was saying this. You know, the labor movement we envision is kind of a white working class that's still the sort of hegemonic, you know, New Deal white male industrial order, and then the labor movement we have being much more diverse, much more complex, and very dynamic. And so I hope, yeah, I think, you know, Marty comes from the building trades, but he's seen that movement. He's walked those picket lines in Boston, you know, with Unite Here, one job should be enough, right? Pushing for sexual harassment provisions for, you know, immigrant women housekeepers. And so I hope he takes that experience on those picket lines with him to Washington, along with his experience from the trades.
It's been terrific talking to you, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us. And I hope we can work with you again, either on our live show or through one of our many podcast affiliates.
Hey, anytime. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.
Solidarity.
All right, that was great. We're gonna have to get him on the Labor History Today podcast. That he just sort of I'd forgotten about that. All right, that's gonna do it for the formal portion of the show, except we do have one more thing coming. Just a reminder before we roll Labor History in 2, folks, stick around. We're gonna do our usual 15 to 20 minute debrief, be joined by some other labor podcasters, and we just sort of hang out and maybe talk about some of the stuff we talked about, maybe talk about some new stuff. I don't know. That's not scripted or planned. So coming up next, we always end. We get an extra because we already got some labor history from Nick. So this is a bonus. Today's has some music in it. It has to do with the time that Johnny Cash went to Folsom Prison. So Evan, if you can run that, then we've got a little bumper at the top, and then Patrick and I will be back with some friends. So thanks everybody for watching.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. That was the day Johnny Cash performed at Folsom Prison. The Man in Black had played numerous free prison concerts before. Country music legend Merle Haggard remembered seeing him perform at San Quentin a decade earlier. Columbia Records recorded the 2 concerts at Folsom for release. It was these recordings that many credit with revitalizing the career of Johnny Cash. His daughter Roseanne believes the 1968 appearance signified her father's own personal liberation, saying, quote, "That was the moment he came into the light, when he embodied who he really was." Performing with the Tennessee Three, June Carter, Carl Perkins, and the Statler Brothers, Cash hit the charts with Folsom Prison Blues, which sold more than 3 million copies at the time. He also took the opportunity to advocate for prison reform and prisoners' rights, providing testimony on the subject in the early 1970s. His brother told the BBC in an interview, quote, "He identified with the prisoners because many of them had served their sentences and had been rehabilitated in some cases, but were still kept there for the rest of their lives. He felt a great empathy for those people." Cash might not have actually shot a man in Reno, but he always sided with the underdog. His songs highlighted the working man's life, from the sharecroppers, coal miners, and auto workers to railroaders, truckers, and prison chain gangs. Cash always gave an unromanticized view of hard living and hard labor, as well as
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, and one of us is chained. None of us are free, 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 and one of us is chained. None of us are free. There are people in darkness.
All right. Nice job, Evan. Very smooth.
Mm-hmm.
You're You're muted, my friend.
A little better than last couple weeks. So yeah.
Yeah. We're getting there. It's
Always improving.
Yeah. No, it was. I mean, it was actually. I thought it was pretty tight. Patrick, what do you think?
I think that everything seemed to work on time.
One thing, actually, we should have tested this before. Your mic sounds low to me. Evan, are you hearing it? Because it sounds low. I don't know. Yeah, Patrick's vocal is low to me.
It sounded good till maybe just this moment ago for Patrick's. I don't know.
Are you using internal or an external mic?
Internal. I mean, I get myself a snowball, you're telling me.
Yeah, we need to get you a snowball for sure. And so that's an approved expense as soon as we actually I need to follow up. We still haven't gotten the AIL check, I guess.
No, I need to. Well, I should double check.
Double check, because I actually just got 2 other ones for the film fest. So double check, because the mail is a bit funky right now. But I think they were cutting that before the end of the year. They were trying to get some money spent that they had to spend. So I don't want to hit them up if it was just in the mail.
Yeah.
But yeah, we need to get you a mic, because it's low for sure.
Okay.
But no, I thought and everybody was. I tell you what, this. Keeping the segment shorter, which actually, honestly, I got that. Remember Rick talked about all his segments are 18 minutes?
Yeah.
I think he's right,
Definitely onto something. I did want to make one point. Chris, you shared an article with me this weekend about, making the Republicans going the way of the Whigs. And this idea of destroying the GOP, the Republican Party. I understand politically, if you're a Democrat, maybe it's not the best messaging, but for the rest of us who are not, seeing these members every day, I think when you look at the Federalists, as soon as the Federalists disappeared, as soon as they were seen supporting some of the Tories and the British after the War of 1812. And so this insurrection and this just, I think, cratering right now of the GOP, this is the opportunity to really sweep the GOP the way of the Whigs, the way of the know-nothings, the way of the Federalists. And then that will open up a new birth of freedom to split the Democrats and actually have legislators who are not brought into office to literally dismantle the government and the administrative state, as Steve Bannon said. So
I don't, I want to be clear. I mean, I sent that to you because you've been talking about it, and I was like, oh, I thought Evan was just on his little, soapbox there, and I thought, oh, actually, this is a thing, and I just, letting you. Anyway, but look, the thing about all this political stuff. I mean, one of my best friends is a libertarian. He's always telling me I'm a liberal Democrat, and I'm like, I've been voting Democrat because what the hell else am I going to vote for? But that doesn't mean, I can tell you all the shit that's wrong with the Democrats. I have serious problems with the party. I remember one time years ago, I started to get involved in Democratic Party politics. And the reason I didn't was because I went to the meeting. And so the meeting starts at 7, and then at 7:15, Patrick shows up late. And they say, oh, Patrick's here now, so let's start again, right? And then at 7:30, Evan shows up late, and they're like, okay, at 7:30, we'll start over and go. And I was like, what the, what about all of us that were here at 7 o'clock? What the hell kind of way is this to me, it was kind of a metaphor, for people who couldn't get their shit together. So I agree that the Democratic Party needs to be split, and I think they are going to, frankly, because I don't think the AOC is going to stand by for some of this shit that the moderates are going to try and pull. So I don't disagree with you. I get nervous.
On the AOC comment, the AOC made a comment a few years ago about if in another country, Joe Biden and I would be in different political parties. Well, okay, so let's look, just to use it as an example, Germany, the world's largest functioning democracy, in Germany, you have a multi-party system, and, AOC would be in a different party from Biden, and Biden would be in a more centrist party. Now, neither of those parties would make up the majority, and they'd probably end up having to come into a coalition with one another in order to form a government. But then at the same time, you know, you have an alternative for Deutschland, the far right party, which would probably represent where the Republicans are right now. You'd have, so there is something to be said, I think, for there is something to be said for these sort of multi-party democracies. I mean, I do have some concern that the Republican Party today is a reflection of how many Americans think. And there was a feature on the New York Times Daily podcast this morning about booting all of these far-right people off of Facebook and off of WhatsApp and off of Instagram. And so, sure, now they can't communicate with these, and so they're using encrypted devices. So if you boot people completely out of the system, it doesn't mean they don't exist.
Right, right. And that's sort of my point when I hear people, you know, whether, you know, usually it's them, but sometimes it's us talking about, let's get rid of, you know, these idiots, right? And even if I agree with you that they're idiots, right? Like today they're idiots, but tomorrow the idiots are in power and then we're the idiot, right? You know what I'm saying? So, you know, it instinctively makes me nervous, you know, even when we have the upper hand. You know, I mean, and we've seen it, you know, when the Democrats changed the rules and then lost power and then got screwed by the rules that they changed. And I understand why they changed it. The Republicans were gaming the system, you know, and it was very frustrating. But, you know, in my view, the Republicans are going to game the frickin' system no matter what. They're really, really good at it. I don't know why they don't figure this out. Like, the Republicans are shit at running things, but they're really good at posturing. And we're really shit at posturing, but we're really good at running things, right?
Yeah, I think another hope, though, is the supply chains, you know, of the Republican Party, the donor class, the billionaires that allow this whole AstroTurf. And I mean, it's not all AstroTurf, of course. There's 70 million people that voted for Trump, but you know, bring that billionaire money into the Democratic Party. Obviously, the Democrats have represented huge swaths of Wall Street and Silicon Valley. Allow the GOP, not even allow it. I think electorally, the party realignment's already happening, and the GOP is going to become a regional party of fanatics and super right-wing folks, and then the Democrats are going to, you know, be the big tent that's eventually going to split next, and that's where I think labor has its opportunity with a lot of these progressive-minded folks who want progressive policy.
Yeah, but I mean, let's be clear, labor has our own problem, which is that, you know, we as a movement are, and we didn't get into it and it was fine. It wasn't the subject, but, you know, just alluding to, you know, where the trades are. I mean, let's be honest, you know, a big percentage of the trades are Trump voters and right-wing voters. This is a well-known fact. You know, even though some of the leadership is actually like the painters leadership is actually, and the laborers have really progressive leadership, but their members, not so much. You know, you look at there's probably going to be this, you know, out and out war between Liz Schuler and Sarah Nelson over the next leadership of the AFL-CIO. On one part, I don't like it because I have friends on both sides of that particular, you know, issue. On the other hand, it's probably something that the labor movement needs right now. You know, we need to have that discussion, debate, fight. You know, but so we're not monolithic either, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And,
Patrick.
Oh yeah.
I know Patrick has something to say about this.
Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labour and the Working Poor has no position on whether Liz Schuler or Sarah Nelson should be the next leader of the AFL. We have no position on it, just to be perfectly clear. We enjoy working with both. They're both
absolutely
leaders, and the AFL will soar into a bright and sunny future under either stewardship.
That said, Patrick.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the caveat and then drop the hammer.
I was actually trying to get you to address the overall issue of, you know, that we, you know, let's just talk about public sector, private sector. You know, the healthcare workers are in a different place. You know, that more of those kinds of things. You know, I mean, one of the great things about the Trump, you know, presidency has been that, you know, it's not just us, but just talking about the labor movement. We all, except I think for what was it, the border guards. I think that was the only union that endorsed him was the border guards. I could be wrong. Somebody could correct me, but I think that there was only one union that endorsed him. I mean, even Reagan, I think, got more than that. And we hated Reagan too.
And Petco.
Oh yeah, Patco. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, Teamsters.
I think the idea of this $3 trillion proposal that Biden's been floating on budget, this is outside of the Federal Reserve that I keep pushing for federal lending, but the $3 trillion.
I was so not going to raise that. I appreciate you putting that in there, but I was like, I need another 10 minutes just to explain that.
So the $3 trillion though, I mean, you have to, if you're Biden, and you have to be thinking like FDR with all these crises, and you have to be thinking about, we need to rebuild the infrastructure. I mean, people, even if you're anti-US foreign policy for the last 20 years, China and Russia are literally, like, China's just taking over. I mean, they produce 60-70% of the world's steel. You need a domestic self-sufficiency, and you need to bring a lot of this back home. And a lot of it can be then applied not to war, but to a peace competition and to rebuilding the entire infrastructure. I mean, it's not just that China has depressed labor, because now they're getting to the point where they have 30,000 kilometers of high-speed rail, so they have very fast transportation. Their electricity costs are going to go down while ours is going to go up. So we need to invest in this. That's going to create building trades jobs. And I think a lot of these people are low-hanging fruit if you can actually go back to production and focus on physical public works investment.
Right. No, I actually agree with that. I'm skeptical that there's leadership for it. You know, it's as we sort of mentioned during the show, I think one of the interesting things about that pandemic is that it's shown that, you know, when we're in, you know, serious trouble, we've now seen it twice in the last 10 years. You know, we saw it after the 2009 meltdown, right? Where all of a sudden they found all this money to, you know, bail out and keep the system from, you know, going over the cliff. And now, you know, here all of a sudden it's like, I mean, you know, even just a few years ago, you know, anybody who talked about giving everybody a check, you know, was you know, called a communist, for God's sake. Seriously, I mean, there's absolutely no way. You know, any of us that were talking about a universal basic income, it was not even a serious, even in the labor movement, it was not a serious topic. You know, you were just not considered at all. And the fact that that it was done, that people got checks, and that, you know, it kept you know, roofs over their heads, you know, shows, you know, to your point, that we can do this. We actually can do this. That's always the thing that sort of amazed me about Trump, was that, you know, if he had just done some investing in infrastructure, right? Like, you know, rather than building a stupid damn wall that didn't benefit a single person, in fact, pissed off a whole lot of people down there on the border, if he'd actually just built some roads, first of all, he would have picked off a bunch of the trades, right? Because that's jobs, you know, and those of us that like to drive on roads that aren't full of potholes. I mean, I actually thought that was like the one thing he was gonna do.
Yeah, and he came in, you know, with that promise. And of course, like, Wall Street's gonna come out and say, oh, we need austerity right now, you know, and all the billionaires are gonna freak out if anyone tries to raise their tax rates to like Bush eras, let alone Eisenhower era. So,
right.
You know, Biden's got to pick the fight, you know, and if he doesn't, then what we see today with the current GOP, it's gonna be much stronger and even more dangerous than we're at now. So.
Right, and this is probably a good place to end it. But, you know, one of the things I keep coming back to is that, and when I've talked to folks about, because I keep asking people, everybody's talking about the PRO Act, and I'm like, I don't think the PRO Act is going to get one in the halls of Congress. It's going to be a movement outside that's going to get, you know, whether it's PRO Act or the kind of thing that you're talking about, that these have to be movements, you know, and the right kind of movements that really do mobilize people. And, you know, my problem is that, you know, like, even though I totally am for labor law reform, you know, you go out and you start talking to union members, there is not people, you know, if you have a union conference in DC, not during a pandemic, where you have hundreds of people that are in DC, they will go to the Capitol and wave signs for the PRO Act. But will they sleep in on the lawn for it. I don't think so.
Half of the, sorry, like I love our Labour rallies, but half of the folks that go are staff from the internationals. Like,
True, it's true.
Not wanting to give the game away, but
Everybody knows this. This is absolutely true. Now, or like I say, they're already a lot of times these rallies are, the unions stage their political convention in town. So everybody comes to town for the political convention and then we march up to the Hill. I mean, it's fun. I like doing it, but that is not an actual movement. I mean,
just the question is, I mean, one of the questions is though, if it's the chances of getting the PRO Act are if it's as heavy a lift as you're suggesting, do you take the half a loaf? And then people say you're not being really radical enough and you're not really doing what you need to do to transform this economy. But some people will say, well, we can't get the full loaf this time, but let's take the half loaf and, and then people will introduce language like, well, you're just nibbling at the edges as opposed to,
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have an answer for that, because I'm not a policy person and policy bores me. But I would say that, the answer from our point of view in the network is to make sure that we're getting, whatever happens with that fight, right, that we're getting people's voices out in that fight. Because if there's going to be any chance to build a movement, whether it's about what Evan's talking about or the PRO Act or, wage theft, which frankly, wage theft is an issue that gets people out in the streets. And interestingly, it crosses some interesting lines. I mean, Carl Racine, for God's sake, has turned out to be really good on wage theft. I mean, actually collecting lots and lots of money off of rich companies for actually, putting pay back in people's pockets. So, and
he's suing the president as a.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. So I'm just saying, I think that the answer from the network is, let's make sure that we're giving oxygen and support to people who have these points of view, so that you have a chance of getting as much of the loaf as possible. That would be my answer.
I just don't want to end up 4 years from now and got jack shit to show for it again.
Yes, I agree, but I just don't want people to be, I think people's expectations, frankly, after going through 8 years of Obama, and it's not that we didn't get anything, but a lot of things that people thought we were going to get, turned out not to be true. So I think people's expectations are probably a bit more tempered this time around. I think the points that were made earlier about Obama, about Joe not being, a charismatic figure. I'm one of the ones who completely got it wrong. When I looked at that field, I figured Joe would be long gone. I mean, I never had any money on Joe Biden at all. He's old, he's boring, he's not only not charismatic, he's anti-charismatic, to this day, when I hear him speak, I'm like, really? But I think he does have a lot of good people. I think the Kamala pick was an excellent pick, especially if he lets her get out there and run some point on stuff. This could really work. And like I say, I think there's a whole bunch of people in Congress that are going to be pushing hard. So I think Biden is less important individually. And frankly, after 4 years of Trump, maybe somebody who doesn't, piss people off all the time, it may be time for somebody who's a little bit boring, right?
Sanders has a committee chair now, doesn't he?
I don't know. Does he?
I believe so, on Senate Finance.
Oh, they gave him something big, didn't they? That was kind of his
Senate budget, I think, on the budget.
Yeah. No, they had because he wanted labor, and they didn't give him labor, so they gave him some big committee.
And Sherrod Brown on banking as well.
Yeah,
so it's going to be interesting.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, those guys could raise some hell, right?
Venezuela.
All right, that's a whole other show.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us